Janine, can I ask you to lead us in a karakia, please?
Nei, morena koutou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai, e hiake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihe mauri ora.
Thank you. Just draw your attention to the health and safety statement there on page 7, the event of we need that. We have apologies this morning from, thank you. Any other apologies? No. We have a mover and seconder. Thank you. Chris and Jennifer, all those in favour say aye. The contrary, carried. Thank you. Any other disclosures of interest as a result of either this agenda or generally? I'll take that as a no. Oh,
Yes,
yes,
for that item.
but you've already declared that.
But for the item on the agenda.
Oh,
Sorry, so I'm on the board of the EPA. There's an item which involves potential conflict with the EPA, if you like, over regulatory compliance. And on the EPA side, I have no inside knowledge. They're not talking to me about it.
thank you for raising that to our attention. Yes, we also have by the confirmation of the agenda. So we need a mover and seconder for the, thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Chris. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. Which now brings us to the confirmation of the minutes. The meeting on the 6th of December. Any issues that committee members wish to raise? Those minutes? If not, can we have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Warren. Thank you, Paul. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Matters arising. Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, councillors. So this report just provides an update for you on matters raised in previous meetings, last one being 6th of December, with responses to those. So a number of them are cleared out. There's a couple that are still work in progress. So in relation to the annual leave management report, some commentary or trend information around staff participation or engagement with EAP services over time, particularly given in some areas we are sitting outside of sort of, I guess, the national average for participation with those services. So staff are continuing to work with EAP to see what further information or insights we can gather to that. And in terms of procedural delegations manual, that will go on to the 2-year review cycle, but just noting with the repeal of some key pieces of legislation at the end of last year, that manual will just need to be reviewed in light of those changes as well.
Any questions of Janine? No? Okay, can we have a mover and seconder to receive this report, please? Jennifer, Chris, all those in favour say aye. The contrary, carried. Thank you. The committee work plan. Janine again.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just thought with this being the first meeting for this calendar year, it would be worth presenting the annual work plan for committee members. This sets out the expected standard content for each of the meetings. Obviously, as matters arise that are topical, they will be added to it. But just setting the scene for the year, thought this would be helpful for the committee. So there for your information or feedback as well.
Comments, questions, Jennifer?
Useful, thanks.
Yeah, some boards stick it at the back of the pack, so we
Just
don't
as a
have to-
standard,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think just presenting it this time in terms of to receive it, we can certainly have it there as a reference point. This is what staff work to. But yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Can we have a mover and seconder to receive this work plan, please? Thank you, Warren. Thank you, Bruce. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Risk Management Activity Report. Is that you?
Yeah, certainly in terms of the report, but I guess this is normally an opportunity for the Chief Executive to highlight what's on his mind at the moment.
Absolutely.
Which is probably a number of the matters that are covered in the report, but there will be certainly other flavours that Chris will be able to bring to the conversation.
Through you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris.
There's a lot on my mind at the moment with everything that's going on. I think maybe three of the top things on my mind is one is what the government's going to do and what that's going to mean for us. You know, the fast track legislation has gone through. There's more changes expected in the RMA. You know, what's the opportunities for us in that versus the you know, because they're talking about nationally and regionally significant infrastructure. Farm plans, we've been ordering council, we need to deliver on national legislation. We've been told to take a light touch and a pragmatic approach, whatever that means. You know, it's just a bit of ambiguity. I guess as soon as the government is able to set direction, it'll make it a much more comfortable space. Cost of living still being high, that impacts us in terms of our services. You know, I think that we've put through a very appropriate LTP for the cost of living space. You know, we've used inflation adjustments, and I just hope that we, you know, that cost of living follows what we've got in our LTP. And the other one is just, I suppose, the geopolitical situation. If things affect supply again and confidence around the world, you know, that can affect a lot of our services. But there's a lot of internal things going on. I just thought it'd be worth noting that I see LGNZs talking about rate rises around the country, and they're talking about 6 to 24%. So I guess we're at that lower band. We're at the 6% for the lower end of it. So, but you know, I think that we've done really well as a council. Get that space.
Thank you, Chris.
Oh, sorry, one other thing. There's a few interregional projects going on at the moment. The IT related projects, our regulatory system, IRIS is going into a next generation. So 11 councils bought into that so far around the country. We're seeing IT projects having quite a lot of inflationary impacts at the moment. So, you know, having to provision for what those costs might be. There's been a information data platform touted for farm plans around the country, so each council doesn't have to have its own data platform. It was all premised on the basis of MFE providing significant millions into that. That's at significant risk at the moment. And then it's going to be, well, what does that mean? Do we need to, you know, create our own databases and so on?
Chris.
Thank you,
Graham, Chair. Chris, I'd just like to ask a question of what you and also the council are doing to ascertain certainty around government intent going forward, because some of us had the opportunity of talking to ministers. We know where they're heading, and I'd like to think that that heading is already being adopted into activities which are being undertaken internally, and that we're not working on things which we know are going to be stopped and or changed. I'm asking the question, what we've done at our leadership level to seek clarification on those issues.
Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair. So the Chair of Council and myself had the opportunity to meet with 3 ministers last week, Ministers Macleay, Minister Simmons and Minister Bishop. And I guess that a lot of their signal is tread carefully, change is coming, but we can't tell you exactly in what form it is. So I don't know if there's specific things in council that is on your mind, Councillor Hughes.
No, it's just a general trend. We know what the general initiatives are going to be coming out of Wellington, and it's impossible for that to be communicated to us immediately. But the messaging is very clear as to where they're heading. And I just want to make sure that we're not spending any time and money on issues that we know are not going to be prioritised and policy moving forward. And I know there's a certain risk of dropping some of this. I also want to make sure that we're not doing things which are going to be canned at a later date, because it costs money.
So I think a good example would be the NPS for freshwater and the policy reviews that are required. You know, they've given a new date of 2027 instead of December 2024 when it needs to be produced by. We've had workshop with council. We've indicated we are taking a slower approach on that, but we're taking the opportunity of extra time to engage with iwi. Now, the government has said they will look at national policy statements. They will try and have a planning framework where it can talk about what the hierarchy is of how the policy statements work. But at the moment, we have no change. So we are just taking a slower approach. And that was canvassed in a workshop with council just recently. I mean, that's an example. You know, we're not going full steam ahead. Farm plans, you know, we've been told to take a light touch and pragmatic. That's what we're doing. That they haven't removed an order in council that requires us to meet legislation, which is to work with farmers so that they can have things in place by a certain date. You know, we're upskilling farm plan developers. You know, there's going to be change. There's going to be farm plan requirements, but they're going to be changes, and we just don't know what they are at this point. That's 2 examples.
Bruce.
Yeah, I just wanted to caution against being too preemptive about a response, because the bottom line is we have statutory obligations and responsibilities. And while the legislation is there and still in place, we still have those responsibilities and obligations. And as some parties to reform are starting to find out in Wellington, because some of us do talk to other people in Wellington as well as you, Chris, it's not quite as straightforward as it might look. So to replace a piece of legislation requires an enormous amount of work. And the reality is the timing for some of that is likely going to be at least 1.5 years out, at least 1.5 years to do a decent piece of legislation. And so for the meantime, I think we have to be cautious, but we do have to meet our existing legislative responsibilities and obligations. Thank you.
No more questions?
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. I think a number of those matters that the Chief Executive had noted are called out in the report. I guess one of those examples of legislative reform that's noted, but we haven't talked about, is obviously the fast track consenting process. When this report was written, the bill was expected, that has now landed. staff are actively engaging in what that means in readiness for making a submission, which I understand is due in mid-April. So I think, we have those existing processes of being able to engage with the new legislation as it's landing, making sure that we've got the right people engaged in that and actively making submissions.
Yeah, just around the fast track consenting, obviously aware that aquaculture has been signalled out, and I know we only had, I think, less than 5 days to put in a submission, where we thought, speaking to 25-year consent extensions. Do we have an avenue to talk to the minister about that time framing? Because I mean that gives us no time to consult at all. I realise they were seeking input from us on how we would look at that, but there's no. To me, it's a huge concern. And even in the aquaculture space, you've got old farms, etc., that don't have the regulatory control that some of the new ones do. And if you're just going to give them another carte blanche, consent. So just looking, is there an avenue for us for feeding into the government about some of the pitfalls of what this fast track is doing in certain circumstances?
Yeah, Chris, do you have a view on that one?
I might have an opportunity to pass that comment on to a minister who's very interested in aquaculture in the next few days, Minister Jones. I guess that's the select committee. Is it select committee process on that one?
I don't believe so. I believe it's straight through to the minister.
Yeah, look, I think it will be probably, I'll be passing some of those sentiments on. But it's just talking about fast track, it's quite interesting because Minister Bishop was telling us he wants an infrastructure pipeline and a national one, which is sort of what they want to put through fast track. But there's also regionally significant activities. Now, we've already had one party come to us, it's in the aquaculture industry, wanting to talk with us about getting our council support for them to go for their thing to be regionally significant, to go through a fast track process. That activity is prohibited in our coastal plan. So it puts us in an awkward position. I actually asked Minister Bishop, does the fast track override all of those type of planned activities and so on? And he said yes. So it's very clear that if it's in the mind of one of several ministers, I think 3 ministers who can do the rubber stamping on the fast track, they can get there. But it's going to put our council into an awkward position of, do we support, do we not, or do we remain neutral? And I guess that those people who want regionally significant activities, with us saying they are regionally significant, it's going to put us in an awkward space.
Yeah, I think Oceania is another one.
Sorry, through Mr. Chair. The fast track legislation overrides a number of acts. It overrides the RMA, it overrides the Conservation Act, it overrides the Wildlife Act, it overrides the Public Works Act and 1 or 2 others. So it's quite a powerful piece of legislation.
I should know the answer to this, but I don't. Is it going to select committee? Because they're fast tracked half the stuff that went through, but is this one going to select committee to be considered? Because there is an opportunity then for us to make submissions.
Yes, so I think the submissions were open until the 19th of April was the date I recall from a discussion with the executive yesterday.
It is, but the schedules at that stage don't contain automatic fast track projects. So anyone who makes a submission to select committee is not at that point, according to news articles, aware of what those projects might be. They would be added late at a later reading.
Yes, through Mr. Chair. As I said before, the government is wanting a pipeline of projects that are nationally significant, which will be within the new infrastructure entity that's being set up. as well as, so I think there's section A, and the section B will be probably other ones that are regionally significant that people want to put in. I understand that they are going to use, maybe those that are automatically in can go through the process, and they're going to use an expert panel or an expert advisory group to filter all the plethora of other ones that people say we want fast-tracked because they're nationally or regionally significant. I understand the expert panel, which will be considering a number of these and putting conditions in and so on, they make a recommendation to the ministers who make the decision.
Just have a question on that. And in going through that process, just if you are able to answer, if the items on the schedule that will then be part of the legislation from the get-go would then be granted by government as a whole, whereas items that come in later would only go through the three ministers. Yeah. Is that correct? Sounds like how it works. Got some nods around the table. Okay.
So the rest of the report looks at the strategic risk updates, both overall in terms of our strategic risk statements and risk appetite, and then reports on the 2 deep dives that have been undertaken for this meeting, which is around health and safety and climate change. So they start on page 37 of the agenda. No substantial changes in there other than, I guess, under climate change, reflecting in the updates that Council has made through various documents and its climate action roadmap. Also in the overall risk statement, recognising the focus that Council has adopted for this long-term plan around resilience in all of its forms, but climate change and the impacts of that, climate adaptation being central to that theme. So probably just happy to take any questions or comments from the committee in terms of those deep dives in particular. Final part of the report is in relation to the legal compliance survey that was undertaken for the period through to the 30th of November, with some commentary there in terms of 88% participation, slightly below what we would be targeting of 90 to 95%. I think that's probably reflective of all of the activity that was happening in the organisation at the end of last year, with some key change initiatives and LTP being developed and the like. But the report provides feedback in terms of those items that have been identified by staff as either zero or partial compliance. The legal services team work with the staff reporting these to make sure that there are mitigation or action plans in place where that anything other than full compliance is noted, and trends in those areas are also monitored.
Any questions for Janine?
Sure.
Jennifer.
Firstly, I really like the new layout with the interconnected additions on the rows to this. It just creates a new depth to it, so I appreciate that. On the climate one, yeah, there were some really good updates. It's really shortened some of the bits. I had 3 points though. One was in the governance row. It talks about the committees we have. I thought it was interesting that JMAs weren't mentioned as a way to connect with iwi on that topic. Just a place where we do discuss that quite often. And in the strategy row, there's reference to the Transport Emission Response Group, but that hasn't existed in this triennium. I think it was a really good initiative that Councillor Strange had helped set up in the previous triennium. So I'm absolutely advocating that it was useful and in future could even be useful again, and especially with the draft GPS that's recently been put out, and how there'll be some challenges with the regional transport plan and staying aligned with all that we had intended. But that's obviously a conversation for the regional transport committee to have. I'll leave that, but I just thought I'd call it out, since if it doesn't exist, then maybe we shouldn't put it in there. And the last one was in the strategy row again. Good to see the Waikato plan and the other bits and pieces taken out, but it did really highlight to me again something that I've already noticed myself, which is that there is really a gap in collaboration between elected members around the region on this topic, which I think there's a risk of not getting optimal gains on the roadmap that we've put out, or the items that they put in their strategy, and might lead to a lot of duplication, because this is work that is supposed to be done collaboratively. So I'm just going to flag that I'm taking that as an action anyway, as the climate committee chair, to try and address that through the next few climate action meetings, to get those elected members talking to each other a lot more across the region on the topic. That was probably it. Yeah, thanks.
Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Jen, for raising that. Yeah, I do know that in regards to the transport and emissions response group, that staff have carried on with that, but governance hasn't quite been tied in as much as it was last triennium. Yeah. Yep. And the other thing is there's 2 different dates that the Climate Action Committee was established within the report. One was 2019 and one was February 2020. So just wondering if we could get some consistency there, please.
Yeah, well, it was Feb 2020. Yeah, since we got elected in October, and that took a while to set up committees.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And then the other thing was collaboration, since we no longer have the Waikato plan. Yeah, there does seem to be a little bit of a void, which Jen mentioned that she's trying to address. And then the other reference to the Waikato Wellbeing Project, and references their community projects, but I don't know, Jen, could you add some context about what they're doing in that space? Because I tried to look for it online and I just could see nothing.
Yeah, the Waikato Wellbeing Project is focused a lot on some of the other topics under the 17 topics. The picking up the climate one's a relatively recent one, and while they have done things over the last few years like support the climathon and things, it's been relatively light, but discussions increased in the last 6 months more so it just hasn't landed yet. That's where that's at.
And do you have any further comments?
No, nothing further from me.
Oh, I had one more. On the health and safety one, I was just curious because I remember the Health and Safety at Work Act review, 2015 when it came in, it was quite a massive shift. We expect, since that's under review again, are we expecting anything significant come through?
So through the chair, I
just
think
not?
that's called out in terms of that risk of the need to so on
Be aware
page
it's
31,
upcoming.
yeah,
Yeah.
in terms of what that means. Yeah,
Cool,
in
thanks.
terms of our overall risk landscape and risk management in that space.
Okay, can I have a mover and seconder to receive this report, please? Bruce, Chris, all those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Internal audit activity update.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This report, it's got quite a lot in it, as well as the reporting back on the completion of particularly the asset management reviews that have been recently completed. So I see we've got the KPMG team online. Welcome. And David all lined up. He's off mute to ready to talk to reports.
Right, good morning everybody. And with me I've got Katie Reddish, who's a senior manager in the team. She worked on the asset management, the main report, and then also Sarah Baker, who's a director in our Wellington office on the climate change aspect of that report. Before I get into those reports, just touching on the progress. So it's both these reports within the pack. The project management framework is predominantly completed. That reporting is being drafted at the moment, so that's in progressing well. And we're just kicking off the risk management maturity review, which is to try and look at the broader picture, which hasn't been looked at for a while, as to how all these things fit together, including the recent risk appetite work and interconnectivity work that we did with the council. So moving through into the reports that are included within the papers, quite detailed reports. I'll give some overarching comments. Katie to perhaps talk to the first report and Sarah to the second at a high level. But the asset management review, so we did work back in 2017. That was following the failure of a stop bank. So quite a large review was completed. The focus of the review was really looking at the fundamentals of asset management that are outlined in the ISO standard on asset management, but it was quite extensive. There were 52 issues identified, so a lot of work to be done. So while it was 2017, which is a few years back, that journey has been quite significant to move forward. So the purpose of the review was to focus on what has happened since then in terms of follow-up those issues. It wasn't to re-review, it was to focus on the issues that were identified, understand what progress had been made and where things were still to be completed. The second part to it, which was added on, which was not part of the original scope of the 2017 review, was to a specific deep dive into climate change. How is that impacting our approach to asset management from a flood protection point of view? So there's a separate report on that. Talking to the first, so yes, large number of issues were identified. Going through and looking at where we're at, and obviously it's easy to get a little bit lost in the detail of the 52 issues, but we've tried to lift it up a little bit into some of those broader categories. But a lot of progress has been made. Asset management software has been put in place. Infor is an industry standard software to track assets, so that is in the process of being implemented. The project management office is well established. Obviously our review over projects is relevant to that, but that is well established. There's been better integration of teams. I think at the time of the 2017 reviews, the responsibility for asset management across flood protection was spread out, so trying to get better coordination between those teams. And there's been identification of critical asset classes, which is obviously quite a key foundation to asset management. So at a high level, of the 52 issues identified, 28 are fully implemented, 16 in progress and 8 not implemented. We did also note that at the time of the review, there was also work in progress, which would address a number of the final aspects that were still to be done. We did note in the report that a number of the residual assets were the higher risk elements or the strategic asset management elements, which can be quite hard to land, but are quite key to moving forward. But Katie, perhaps if you just give a snapshot of some of the headlines of what is left to do, perhaps from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everybody. As David said, I think the progress that has been made since the 2017 review is really to be commended, and the approach taken by the team to work through that improvement team is really structured and organised. So that was really good to see. As David mentioned, lots of the low-hanging fruit have been addressed and have been realised. It's the more strategic asset management subjects that are now remaining for action, and those are more difficult to implement, and we acknowledge that, because they can take a real need for changing the way teams and whole teams interact and organize themselves. So if I just focus on where the residual ratings are medium and high, one of the sort of overarching issues that we discovered was that scope of asset management across all of the teams is not always so well understood. So the asset management is more than just the management of assets. It's everything that goes either side of that that ongoing management. So the planning at the front end and the review and the risk at the back end. And so I think there can be some work done on the understanding of asset management and the roles that everybody plays in that process. So that was one sort of overarching theme that we found. Related to that is clarification on the different parts of the asset management system. So, so within your asset management system, you have a policy, you have asset management objectives, you've got your infrastructure strategy, your regional asset management plan, and then flowing down from that, your portfolio asset management plans. So those are all really key fundamental components of your asset management system. Where there is some room for improvement is identifying what the relationships are between all those parts and where roles are defined and distinct in each of those component parts. So that we put those comments in our report, and I can see from your management comments that work is underway to just clarify the linkages and the roles of each component part. Moving on to demand management, that was another one where the residual risk rating remained high. We can see that there is demand management already in place. And our recommendation, particularly in the light of recent major weather events, is that real climate change data is used and to inform demand management going forward. And we noted that you have a climate change guideline document, so it would be really good to see the outputs of that document integrated with your asset management demand planning. And also to see where current and forecasted land use comes into play with demand management, and again using that evidence-based data that can be collected from weather events, an indication of how resilient each area of your protected land proves to be, especially when data can be collected from those weather events. So that was demand management, and I suppose in some way related to that are your levels of service and performance reporting. So the example that we gave with this one with performance reporting was that we know that there's a lot of data collected. And what we recommend is that some non-technical outputs are used to supplement your performance reporting. The example we gave related to your hazards portal, which we thought was a really useful tool. But one non-technical output that could be used from that is demonstration of the number of protected properties from your flood protection schemes as an indicator of the levels of service and the performance of those levels of services. So I think when we looked at the hazards portal, we could see what was protected by each scheme, but you couldn't necessarily see how many properties were, or buildings, or what type of land use was protected. And I think you've probably got the data, and it would just be a really useful thing to integrate into that tool, which is publicly available. So those were the medium and the high residual risk ratings. Everything else we could see had either been fully implemented or we considered to be a low risk. And it was also clear at the time of the review that many of those actions were in play and intended to be implemented in the draft ramp as it was when we last saw it.
We'll pause there before we go into the climate change component. So any questions from the committee?
You're closer.
So thanks for the report. It's excellent. And as you said, it's quite long and thorough, so it's good. I'm very happy with this report. In the context of asset management, what I have seen in the past is like a spider diagram that has a circle with all the various components of asset management and a line of them and a line that draws up the dots showing the level of maturity against each of those key attributes, and then perhaps a target, because we may not want to be 5 out of 5, we may pick to be 4 or 3 or 3.5, because it just suits what the risk and the way we intend to operate. Is that something that's, so I'm interested to know what the sort of overall asset planning, asset management maturity is, because that's kind of the big picture gig. So lots of recommendations, kind of cool, but it's lots of recommendations. So for me, from a governance perspective, what's the maturity, and are there some little gaps which would be shown by the dips in the spider chart where we want to perhaps move, because we don't have to be 5.
No.
We probably don't want to be because it costs too much. So is that something that we can work on, or whether we self-assess or whether we get you to do it? I don't know. It's something which I think is a very good tool, but it's only me.
I may be wrong. I almost feel like management at one stage in the past did some maturity type assessment work on asset management, but I could be wrong on that. It is certainly something that could be done. I think the same themes would come through in terms of some of the tactical elements would probably be quite mature. It's probably that strategic element. It's how far you go with those, but they are quite important to drive everything else, as compared to wanting to be a 5 in the operational tactical aspects.
Yeah, so there was an asset management review undertaken quite recently by ACOM. I'm just quickly looking at it now to see how you did, but it has been done. It has been done reasonably recently. So you do have those scores from 2023, which, and we did note that we had that report as a reference when we were doing our review.
Yeah, so through the chair, that what has been reported probably a couple of meetings ago. In terms of the outcome from that asset management maturity. I guess it's always one of those interesting things to almost sort of triangulate and validate sort of different assessment processes with each other, because it's taking a different lens, and where do you get the richness from seeing those different perspectives of feedback as well. But yeah, that has been done recently.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I've just got a couple of questions around 2 of the items in that survey summary of the review findings. So, and just one of them is around two low risk, one identified in 2017 and then followed up 2023. It's item 12, which is service delivery models. And just after a little bit of a comment around your comments on WRC are still to implement explicit internal benchmarking methodologies for better future cost estimation. It's a little bit of a concern for me that that's actually sort of a low, or identified as a low risk. I think it's a big piece of our customer delivery.
Okay. Yes, I can see which one that you are referring to. So I remember one of the examples given for that part of review was relating to cost escalations, and I think at the time that there wasn't a clear sort of database of exactly what costs for particular work programs should be. It was always based on the previous year's cost, and of course at that time construction costs increased dramatically, sort of just post-COVID, And so it was difficult for the team to refer to okay, so this is an anomaly. What should the cost be today based on a standard or an average that didn't take into account the supply chain issues post COVID. So that's what that comment relates to.
So you consider that low risk?
Hmm.
I guess it's to the extent that there are other mitigations and monitoring and review over those cost estimates. But I guess there's judgment and determining what the risk rating is. From a governance point of view, it would only be to the extent that management decided to risk accept those lower findings, which I'm not aware that's the case. So as long as they still get done, the risk is closed out, whether it's low or medium. But I suspect there are other mitigations in that area around reviewing those cost estimates. The low risk finding was to say, actually, this could improve it, but it's not that there's a complete absence of other controls.
Okay, thank you. And the other one's just around, it's item 42, which was basically, again, sort of similar lines, review key service provider relationships and evaluate opportunities for more integrated and longer term engagements. And it's been noted that WRC executive leadership team needs to find ways to obtain longer term approvals which span multiple annual project approval cycles, and then therefore allow longer term contracts to be offered to the market. Again, sort of through ICM, and that it's something that I think is really critical. We need to give those contractors that commitment to that and the cost savings for the organisation. Just if there was an expansion on that, that's probably just a comment more so than a question, really.
Yeah, I can expand just a little bit on that. I think the team knew that that this would be a really good solution to some of the problems they have with the short-term nature of things, but I think there is a frustration in that they're not able to commit longer than the span of the sort of long-term plan time frame and cycle, and that's what makes life difficult for them. They can only commit within the timeframes of the long-term plan, and for big projects that doesn't always work as well as it could.
Okay, thank you team. Thanks, Graham.
Yeah, so through the chair, can I maybe just make a clarification on that? So our delegations specifically consider the letting of multi-year contracts over a certain value that actually come back to the council table for a decision on. So they come back through the Finance and Services Committee. And the rationale for that is an acknowledgement of that issue. If we've got a long-term plan and then we do an annual plan. So a decision around letting longer term contracts does have a sense of committing future funds on behalf of the council to do that. But we do have mechanisms by which we can consider those things. And I think this is absolutely an action that is acknowledged, that we need to look at those longer term supplier arrangements. We have examples of it actually in the biosecurity space, where we have, a multi-year engagement with the service providers, and then you agree an annual work program with them. But you've got that capacity locked in. You haven't got the exact work necessarily locked in, but the mechanism is there. So we do it in some parts. We haven't nailed that opportunity in this space.
Chris, and through you, Mr. Chair, it's a really important aspect of what we're looking at with procurement, and we are trying to review our procurement strategy and policy. So to do that, I've had a couple of probably major contractors to this, potential contractors to this council say, if you can give us certainty in the pipeline, we might be able to come to some other arrangements. So we are looking at that procurement approach.
Right. Should we move towards the climate change component of the report?
I think Chris wants to ask a question.
Thanks, Chairman Graham. Look, I'd just like to pick up on a couple of points. I want to come back to David. I support exactly what Warren said, and in fact, I've been involved in one of the meetings with our chief executive, talking to one of the contractors, and I'd like to think that initiative is in progress and is going to be moved forward, because I felt the discussions we had was very constructive, and I think there's a huge opportunity there for the council to work collaboratively with approved contractors, and that will give a benefit to both parties. But the issue I'd like to come back to David on, and this may be below the level at which you've been looking, because it's most of it's fairly strategic, but I've got a particular interest in trying to reduce costs. And when we had the last revaluation, there was a quite expensive and extensive undertaking to establish what was the fair replacement costs for the infrastructure assets out there. And Becca were engaged. You may well have seen their report. And that was part of the reason for the extra costs, I believe, is because of the lack of integration between our financial systems and the asset management systems. Now, I'm not sure. Infor, I understand, has closed that gap, but I'd like a third-party confirmation that that is factually correct, because I don't want to come to our next revaluation cycle in 2 years' time and find that the same issues that presented themselves last year with the revaluation is going to occur again in the future. So I'd just like to know if any work has been done, in fact, in terms of verification of the accuracy of the financial data being captured in Infor relative to each of the infrastructure assets.
The scope of the review wouldn't have extended to that detailed work. It would have followed up as to the, has there been work done? So that wouldn't have been part of our scope. But Katie, I don't know if I know there was comments on integration in the report itself. If you can comment on that.
Yeah, sure. So we didn't look at it closely, but we did have a run through of the asset management capability of Infor, and it was noted during those demonstration sessions that at the time the integration with the finance package wasn't yet complete. So there were workarounds in place while that is still pending.
Okay, thank you. I'll pick it up later on. Thanks.
So just turning back to the ACOM report, one of the issues they raised was data cleansing and the role that Infor is going to take in future asset management.
Yes, and so through the chair, I think that's one of the things of as you get better systems and you get a better understanding of your data, you find out what the challenges with that may be. So I think that's something that the team continue to work with. And so I think our data quality had actually reduced from memory because we actually had better systems and ways of capturing that information and reviewing it.
Right. All right. Let's move to the climate change component. So this was it wasn't part of the initial scope back in 2017, but obviously very key consideration. This was a high level consideration of climate change. It focused on, what are the structures, systems, capability of Waikato Regional Council within the context of flood protection more, rather than more broadly. So Sarah, did you want to just summarise some of the key findings?
Yes, thank you, David, and good morning, everybody. So as David said, this was a very high level review, really focusing on governance and capability. And I think the key takeaway from here is that there's actually a lot going on in this space. Council teams are very actively working at how to integrate some of the increased information and data available around climate change and climate risk with how they're actually doing things on the ground. And this reflects very much what we're seeing in councils around the country. There's a lot of movement in this space. There's some challenges around capability generally across New Zealand and capacity of that capability. A few experts exist currently, and they are kept so busy that it's very hard for them to communicate and cascade their expertise to more junior and other team members. And this was, again, very much what we found with council, that you've actually got a lot of people who understand that there's a need here. They might be struggling to find the time with your in-house experts to really make traction in what that means for them on a day-to-day basis. The I guess most important element that we explored with the teams, though, was this question of what we call transition risk. So when we talk about climate change, we think about two different elements to risk. The physical risk is the thing that immediately comes to mind, of the impact from weather events and flooding and sea level rise and so on. But the transition risk is the risk that will be generated through the incredible disruption from decarbonising our economy, which will be, increasingly escalating, and obviously impacts your spatial plan, your land use. It will affect how people move around your region, where people choose to live and work, and so on. And actually integrating that perspective into things like the physical risk and asset management will be a crucial step in the years ahead. It's not something that we expect you to be highly mature in right now, because it is very much a moving creature. But it is something that I would expect council to be keeping an eye on, and through this kind of review, just making sure that there is continued progress towards that kind of top-down integration.
Any questions on that report?
There would appear to be none, David. Oh, sorry, Jennifer.
My comments, I like the report, the 4 recommendations. They're really relevant points. None of it surprised me. Agree on the point that transition risks is the next step for our council as well. And that succession planning is a real point. While we have great people, if they're not here, it does slow down work, and hence the clear accountability called out makes a lot of sense, because we have had delays due to that issue in the past year. And the calling out of the sustainable infrastructure decision-making framework implementation measure over time, I think would be really great, and I'll be raising that again in future CEO KPI discussions. Thanks.
Yeah, so back on the transition risks, I agree what you've just said. But so we most organisations run around with engineers and work out the physical risks, but the transition risks is the big issue. That's kind of very judgmental. You've got to pretend what the future is going to be. You have a guess, come up with 2 or 3 scenarios and say, how do we fit into that? So is that kind of what's next? Is that what we're saying, or? And you're going to reorganise everyone and find some people to go and do it. Is that what's happening?
I think so. Karen might be able to inform the response better. I guess that another little aspect of this is going to be the Climate Change Adaptation Act that the government gets into, where roles and responsibilities need to be well defined. And if we are talking transition or we are talking total change, there's big questions about who and how that occurs. Karen, did you have any comments?
Morning, committee members, Chair, through you. Just to reassure you that this work is indeed underway. The transition risks over timescales is underway for the scenario planning, and the transition risks are actually already covered to a degree in our roadmap, and we discuss these and mitigate issues and risks as they arrive, but they're changing all the time. And we can see that now with conversations about policy settings at central government in the transport space, which is one of our biggest areas of climate risk and opportunity, and also the ETS conversations that we're hearing now. So these are live issues. They're constantly changing, and we have to be across them. So this is why we are looking at it quarterly and reporting to this committee and also the Climate Committee. The Scenario planning is part of the risk assessment, and that phase 2 program is coming to the Climate Committee at its next meeting, and it's just been finalised now. So that is also available to councillors to have a look at that program.
So that's, I mean, we had the report on the deep dive into the climate risk, which was cool, and I was very happy with that. But this is the guts of it, really, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, this is the big thing. This is where all the money is, really, is in the asset planning. I mean, we can get we work with our fleets, and we're doing a great job with the buses, and we can do things for ourselves. But this is where the real game is. This is, yeah. So I think this. Yeah, this back ends on the other one just so well. This really completes the picture. So I'm again, and that answer helps to complete the picture too. Thank you.
Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Paul, for your comments. Yeah, my question would be around if, you know, as a regional council taking that regional leadership, and if we're struggling with staff capability, are we sort of looking down the line at, you know, the smaller TAs are going to struggle to find those climate staff. So are we looking at how we can provide that leadership in the region and help our TAs to come to grips with, you know, their land use and their investments in regards to climate? Is that sort of in scope, or is that sort of coming further down the track, would be my question.
Yeah, good morning, committee. Good morning, councillors. I'd make reference to the regional resilience business case that's been put forward as part of the long-term plan. What that does signal is a bit of a refocusing of that particular program. And also, I guess part of councillors' discussion was to introduce some additional resources down the track to signal those. And that's exactly what that program does, is working with our territorial decision makers to provide them with assistance in some of that capacity, which is better served at a regional level.
Three, Mr. Chair, I was just going to say that it's also a really important component of the spatial planning that we need to do going forward. And of course, we're putting resources into that for 4 years to try and make sure that we think of our future in a resilient way with respect to climate.
And just to add to that, if I may, Chair, thank you. Yeah, just ensuring that that pipeline through education and internships is there as well. So understand that Waikato Uni do some sort of climate degree now. Yeah, but just maybe taking that a step back to our work with the secondary schools to actually ensure that we're, you know, getting that pipeline of education and people coming through. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me speak. I just think there's a real issue there that you're having a whole big discussion without involving the community that's going to be involved in. And they're just completely left out of it. And they're going to be horrified when they hear about decisions you've made at this table and they haven't been involved in it. And it's going to affect their life, and it's going to affect the affordability of being on their land, and you're not having that discussion with them. So I think that's a serious, this is a risk and insurance committee, and you're not allowing that community to have a voice here of that risk, and that's serious. That's billions of dollars of agriculture assets you're talking about without involving them in the discussion.
Chris.
It's the point's well made. I don't think there's any intention to, well, run ahead and make decisions without involving community who'll be affected. And as I say, that if we get a Climate Change Adaptation Act, it might give us some clear direction on who and how that might occur. But we have, we've got what's referred to in here is the SIDIF, the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Framework going forward. That's the KPI of mine this year that is being trialled and piloted to have a look at how do we engage with stakeholders and have some of those decisions. That's a KPI I've got this year, which Greg's got. And but you know, for the future, for the big things, there's no question we've got to involve communities and those affected parties.
The other issue is they're still paying a level of service of something you're going to deny them of in the future. So that's a serious issue as well. So
I can make a further comment there. I've been frustrated for a long time how long this sustainable infrastructure decision-making framework isn't being implemented. Hence, glad that it's a KPI. Hence saying, like the call out that we need a KPI to make sure we're on track, because I want to talk to community as soon as possible. And nothing we do around level of service can be done without talking to community. That's the consultation under local government we have to do. I think this council has been taking a long time getting comfortable in this space, hence we talk about it, and has been a bit reluctant to, and hence we're doing a trial first and then we'll have the next conversations. I hear your point. I've been thinking your point for so long. I'm just keen to go for it. And the point is that we also need to do that with the district councils leading a lot of that work. Hence, really glad that we've got maturity in them now, having hired staff who are going to lead projects like the Wharekaua Coast and then getting us on the governance of their, say, the Karakia district adaptation plan, where that conversation also can happen. And the Waikato district, yeah, really stoked to see that the local TAs have started hiring some people who can do this kind of work with us, because we were kind of ahead of them in this space, and rightfully so, based on the information we need, the technical stuff for them to then work with. But yeah, I feel like it's coming together and can't wait to get out there, and get even your ICM subcommittees talking about this as soon as they want, whenever they want, and with you.
probably one more. Yeah, I've just got, as I said, I've got serious issues because I've had serious, so I'm sorry, some people reach out to me to understand how are you going to make it work when there's a conflict between the climate change and the level of service at the moment. So they're saying that they're not going to be able to meet the level of service if they take the climate change aspect into their job. So that's just staff and the council already reaching out and saying that. So I think we've got a real conflict that we've got to seriously start thinking about how we're going to manage it. That's my opinion, Ed.
So through the chair, I'd probably note that our long-term plan is really our first step into a lot of these very public conversations and noting the issues and challenges that we actually face in the long term. And the intent is very clearly to be involving those communities through those conversations. We can't act without them, without understanding what they need, want, are prepared to pay for. But I think, come a few weeks' time, there'll be a pretty public statement from this organisation around the criticality of those resilience conversations from a really broad base. So look forward to starting that focus.
Right. David, do you have anything else you or your people want to say at this stage?
No, but some good discussion.
We need a mover and seconder to receive this report. Angela, thank you. Thank you, Paul. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. We now move on to item 11. Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee members. So we have a paper prepared for you today, which gives a background to some challenges that we've had with our pest plant program, and particularly the use of a particular herbicide, but provides you with some further detail around how that risk is managed and some outcomes that have been achieved subsequent to this challenge that we've had. I'm joined by Alistair Fairweather, our Senior Biodiversity Biosecurity Advisor, who's been doing a lot of work in this space. And he'll be able to provide you with some key points around what we've done, how we've responded to these challenges, how we've been working very closely with the regulator, EPA, and some of the good outcomes that we've seen as part of this process, along with an update on where we're currently at. I'll pass over to Alistair to provide you with some high-level points.
Good morning, councillors and committee. Just as background, alligator weed poses a significant threat in the Waikato region to our economy, biodiversity, water quality, and animal welfare. There are animal welfare issues around it. As a result, it's listed as progressive containment pests in the Waikato Regional Pest Management Plan, and it's our largest pest plant control program in the region. It's approximately $0.7 million per annum. It's extremely hard to control. You can dig it up, but that's only workable on a limited scale, and so the key and most effective tool for managing it is the use of herbicide metsulfuron-methyl. It can be applied by a knapsack, gun and hose from a boat, or via aerial spraying using a spray broom from a helicopter. Its use over water to control aquatic pests such as alligator weed is highly regulated under the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act 1996. And on top of that, you need a resource consent to apply it aerially over water. When it was approved originally in 2012 under the HASNO Act, an environmental exposure limit was set for it in water of 0.0084 micrograms per litre. Now, this environmental exposure limit is how high it's allowed to be outside where you've applied, outside the operational area you've applied it in after significant mixing. Just to put it in context, when you talk about 0.0084 micrograms per litre, what that actually means, best example is Waterworld's 50-metre pool. It's an Olympic-sized pool, 2.5 million litres of water in it. If you are going to exceed the exposure limit there, you're going to put in 0.02 grams of metsulfuron into the pool. And for example, at half a teaspoon, it's 2.8 grams. So we're talking about minuscule amounts they can you can't exceed. The other point about this is when they set it in 2012, there was very limited data, took a very conservative approach to it. So in 2022 and 2023, we were controlling alligator weeds in Lake Whangape and exceeded the EL on both occasions. As required under our permission from EPA, the resource consent, we notified EPA and they issued us with a letter saying that informing us we had exceeded it, and that while they weren't going to prosecute us, we needed to take all necessary steps in future to ensure that we didn't exceed the EEL. At the same time as notifying them, we took an investigation, primarily focused on had the contractor done something wrong to exceed it. But we also looked at how we'd done some of the monitoring required to measure the EEL. Right throughout the whole program, incident investigation, we worked closely with the Environmental Protection Agency, who looks after the HASNO Act. And what we did was we tried to understand the reasons for the breaches and how we could mitigate against them. And it's quite clear that the contractor wasn't at fault, and the reasons for exceeding the EL are complex. They're outlined in bullet point 22 of the report. The report also outlines the mitigation measures that were agreed with the EPA in bullet point 24, so I'm not going to go into detail of them. What happened was we implemented these mitigation measures this year at Lake Whangape and didn't exceed the EL. But what's possibly more important in our monitoring of that operation was pre-control water monitoring showed that there was metsulfuron already being measured from other sources outside of our operation. In the report, we identified 3 key risks. Now, in actual fact, they've changed slightly. So I think I'll talk about the risks of if we continue to breach the EL and the wider potential of a wider reassessment first. They're actually quite low. And the reason we've come to this conclusion is there's significant new evidence that the EL that was set in 2021 is way too low. Current suggestions are it should be at least 2 times higher than it is than it was set back then, because there's a lot more scientific data that's come out. And on top of this, because there's already met in the system, the EPA would be very hard to prove it was us that was causing the exceedance of the EL. We also suggested that it could trigger a wider reassessment. As I've said, EL set too low, so from the council's benefit, we can show that we're following all the regulations. We're going to improve things, make it tighter, but we're following them all. So the EL would probably increase. We could hopefully meet that. Where the risk would be is to other users, such as farmers who are using it, that have less requirements around how they apply it, or even in terrestrial systems where it could enter in waterways. So those risks are low to the council. There could be a reaction from the council to actually suspend our spraying program and using metsulfuron. And that would be potentially an extremely big issue for the council. We'd be unable to achieve the objectives of our regional pest management plan. There'd be significant impacts for economy, water quality, and animal welfare throughout the region. So we wouldn't be recommending taking that approach at the moment. So a couple of things have happened since the report's come out. We've actually had 2 exceedances at 2 other sites this year. Unfortunately, our monitoring pre-control was probably not done correctly, so we can't show if it was related to our spray program or metsulfuron already in the system. And so we're doing a complete review of how we do our water monitoring and an overall review of our program where we can tighten up our best practice and operational things. And then on top of that, it's not just Waikato Regional Council, this is an issue for Bay of Plenty have now had exceedances, and they've also found that there's met already in the aquatic systems. So what we're doing is we're currently working with other regional councils at a national level to try and get the environmental exposure limit changed by the EPA to meet the more current scientific evidence. So that's where it's at the moment. And what we'll do is once we've done full and a wider review of our spray operations and try and understand what's happened this year, we'll update you later.
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. I guess just to close off, so to be clear, so we have received that formal warning from EPA, so we are taking this extremely seriously. As you hear, we've had some very good outcomes from our change methodology at this particular site, but we have had a couple of other sites that have actually flagged now that we have ceased those operations and are doing those full investigations to understand exactly what's going on here. Clearly, we're not alone in this space, and so we'll continue to work with our partners to come up with solutions to what is something that's really critical to this program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chris. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Couple of questions. Firstly, is our strategy to control or eradicate the alligator weed? Next one is, if we've got a build-up of the herbicide in the waterways, is the alligator weed, do we know if the alligator weed's actually building resistance to the herbicide? And if the program at the moment, you say it is effective, but the current levels are too low, and I'd just like to understand, have we got a chance of getting on top of this problem? Because it is a real issue. I know in Lake Taupo and Kinloch used to be very prevalent in there, and they've now got rid of it out of the marina there. So, you know, are the current levels of the herbicide allowed to be used going to meet the WRC objectives?
So firstly, you asked about the program, whether we're going for eradication or control. Progressive containment it's trying to restrict it to its core area and control all the surrounding eradicate surrounding populations. So the core area, it's Lake Whangape, the lower Waikato, right down through the Delta, and Whangamarino a little bit, Whangamarino. So that's the core area. And we're trying to stop the spread outside of that area. So we eradicate populations where they turn up outside there, and then try and suppress it within the containment area to stop it spreading. Does that make sense?
It does, but is there no way of eliminating it in these core areas?
No, not at the moment with the current infestation levels. Over time, the aim would be to slowly restrict its, reduce the containment area and progressively push it back into a smaller area.
Because I know from Kinloch that they've managed to get rid of it there. Is that because of the water depth?
It's never been in Kinloch. There's no record of it.
Oh,
it's Hornwort. Sorry, that's Hornwort that you're talking about up there, which is a different aquatic species, invasive species. Resistance. In all honesty, I don't know. This detection, now understanding that there is some metsulfuron in the system prior to our spraying operations, and Bay of Plenty's ones and elsewhere around New Zealand is a significant issue and potentially needs further investigation. Sorry, your last question was?
Whether the current you're allowed to use legally are going to meet your objectives, which is control, basically.
Yes, they are. Okay. And there is continued research into improving the control tools. So legally, we can use metsulfuron and glyphosate. Combining the two, controls the plant, but also if you use metsulfuron by itself, it potentially causes some fragmentation, and those fragments can go and then start growing elsewhere further down. Combining with glyphosate stops that fragmentation, so the whole plant dies. So we've got ongoing research to improve our tools as well.
Yeah, we had a really interesting workshop earlier in the training where we learned a lot more about how alligator weed is becoming an emerging issue here and how bad it already is further up north, and we don't want to become like that. Just on the question that Chris asked, is the from a logistical perspective, if there were the funds for it, is funding the issue or is it logistics? Just curious, because obviously you have to keep throwing money at this otherwise to a greater extent. Yeah.
No, it's both. When the regional pest management plan was reviewed, cost benefit analysis was done, and it's a balance of what you can achieve for the money, which is why we've gone for progressive containment. If we had a lot more money, we'd do a lot more.
Good to be aware of. The topic of perhaps an increasing breach level over time, obviously that work will be done, and that to me is like just a sidetrack. I note the levels that we'd measured would have breached even a doubling of, so either way, it's an issue to deal with. Question I had was, have we heard about this and the breaches with the EPA before this? I don't recall myself, but I'm not on every committee.
No, so the letter only comes out if you breach. And
I just meant as a council, did we get briefed by the CE or Greg at any point earlier?
So
there's quite a lot happening
through ICMC. There have been reports of this through the Integrated Catch Management Committee.
good to be aware of, thanks. And I did wonder when I was reading the report as to, whether there are more mitigation measures that could have been mentioned, like updating SOPs and spreading across the work to other locations, but you've referenced that. I'm glad that that's happening now. And also the work with other regional councils so that that's all coordinated around the country. The things that I just thought were missing from the report was I was interested more on what, not just the legal breach reason for it was, but the actual reason that that level is set, what is the actual effect on the environment. But I won't take our time up with that just now. I just thought that would have been really helpful from a getting a big picture idea of this. I could probably Google it. And those pre-control water samples that you've taken the last few times, were they close to the breach level, or were they quite low? Like, we're talking about how there are others in the environment adding to these levels. They've been under the level. Were they close to the level? Like, was this is it pushing us over quite quickly, or is it quite far away from the level, so it's a minor issue of others using this chemical around the same time?
We have been, so if you think about the last 10 years of doing this, we have been detecting met in the water system before we've started. These particular operations have been under the limit, and then the post testing has been over. Yeah. So
I just thought if they were close to the limit, it's more likely that the post testing might be.
Yeah.
Over. So the cumulative effect. Yeah.
The issue we have an issue where the detectable amount is that we have to send these samples to Australia to get tested, and they can't actually test that low.
Right. The detectable amount is quite close to the limit itself. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That's what you're saying. Then my very last point is just, it's really good that we're thinking about what we are doing and what regional councils are doing, but it strikes me that, we do coordinated pest control for animals, and people work together for that. Just think, if this is an issue that people are using this chemical in areas that we're looking after, part of our procedure could be to look wider as to how we engage with those landowners and have a coordinated approach with them so that we're not tripping each other up, or they're not tripping us up, especially with this limit. I'm not keen to get more breaches.
So metsulfurons used widely for gorse, broom control. So farmers are using it, and I suspect it would be very hard to do a coordinated approach of timing and things across the whole of the region.
Oh, no, I just meant for a certain catchment like Lake Whangape, for example, where we don't want to get more breaching on, particularly that location.
I probably couldn't speak to how we would be able to do that. It would be very difficult.
It's just something I'd be keen to look into.
I agree, but theoretically, the other users, because they don't have a resource consent or a EPA permission to do it, shouldn't be applying it anywhere near a waterway. How you address that issue is quite different from a coordinated approach, I think.
Yeah.
It's probably an education program for farmers. We can't even tell if, sorry, no, well, I won't use the term farmer, I'll use the user could be applying it at completely the wrong rates. There's nothing to stop them adding in a bit extra just to make sure they kill the plant. So, there are a whole lot of variables that come into play about that side, working with others. It's an education thing that potentially EPA should be approaching.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of education with landowners. I think it's something we could look at. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to reiterate something that Greg said with respect to breaching of levels. We did more recently, as a result of our investigation and EPA's investigation, we have a formal warning on record. We now have another breach that's been notified to the EPA. Given that we've got a history, I just don't want to minimise, the uncertainty of levels and everything in terms of the fact that that's something that the Risk and Assurance Committee needs to be aware of. Bruce.
Yeah, look, thanks, Jennifer and Chris. You've sort of covered off the actual aspects of the weed itself and the method of control. And I'm just wondering if we could consider a broader view, a longer term view here, because we appear to be in a vicious cycle of control of a particular weed. And my sense of that particular weed is that actually it's more symptomatic of a way that we manage a catchment and the degradation and the hypertrophic levels in Lake Whangape than it is a weed in its own right. It's actually telling us something about the way we manage a catchment. And I wondered whether that has been thought about and considered in terms of the longer term planning that would need to be required to reach the ultimate solution, which would be massive reduction, at least in the biomass of the weed in the system. I think it does require real long-term thinking here, and the vicious cycle of having to use this particular method, which is not good for nature, basically. Yeah.
Sorry, I think you're quite right, but I think, so we're doing a complete review of our program, but I think the other issue is it's not symptomatic of the ecosystem itself. It's where it actually got into the Waikato region from Northland, Auckland, and has spread out from those sites. So yes, it's contributing to the degradation, so it's important that we do control at those sites. But if you're looking at it on a region-wide perspective, alligator weed's quite happy to invade pristine environments, and so we're trying to stop it getting to the other areas as well, or it becomes a terrestrial weed, impacts on the economy, etc.
The biomass is generally a way higher in degraded systems. There is a loop here. There is a feedback loop. And I think the feedback loop does need to be considered in the longer term planning for what you're doing about the continued invasion. It's not a coincidence that the highest amounts are in Whangape. I can tell you that now.
Yeah, okay. Robbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, to the committee, we're actually looking at releasing a document of self-administration on drains. And you're worried about those farmers that have got alligator weed will definitely be spraying it because be able to buy it. So this issue isn't going to go away. It's actually going to get more serious. You won't be able to use it at all because the farmers will be doing it, controlling it at their end, and you won't be allowed to use it because the catchment's already contaminated because they're not going to get measured. So yeah, the risk is huge here. Yeah.
So two things just to answer that. I'm on the EPA website, so I'm talking about public information here. But there, under Section 95A of the Hazardous Substances Act, you now have to get a permission to use this product, and there's only 23 permissions in New Zealand. So if farmers are using it, they're breaking the law immediately.
I understand that, but there's already some threatening to use it.
And I don't know how you track that, but that's the EPA's problem, not ours. So the EPA are doing a reassessment of this product, and they call for information closing October last year. Have you had any discussions with them about the reassessment? They're reassessing a whole list of stuff, and one of them they want to cancel, but I'm not sure what they're doing with this, and I actually honestly don't know either, by the way. But are they wanting to make it easier to use or harder to use?
So a reassessment looks at, it's a blank canvas. So you don't know. It's basically using the best scientific evidence available currently to review all the controls around how it's used, etc. So yes, we've been working with the EPA and, well, sorry, the other regional councils jointly have made submissions and are working with the EPA on this project. But put it this way, EPA doesn't take on reassessments lightly because they cost a lot of money, and they don't have that money available to do many reassessments. So they're very rare when they do them. But this, yes, so it is going ahead. Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Just clarify, so the permissions are around using overwater as opposed to terrestrial application of this particular herbicide.
I think we've given that a fair old push. Yes. Can I have a mover in? Thank you, Chris. A seconder, please. Thank you, Bruce. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you. We now have a presentation from Brad Olson on the economic outlook, but I would first like to just, can we take a 5-minute break, but just only 5 minutes, please? Thank you.